Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another animation analysis video, and of course in the spirit of the EZAs dropping today for the STR Gogeta Blue, and of course the big man himself, Tech VEGITO Blue. We are going to be taking a look at their animations. Of course, earlier today, Gogeta's video came out. Definitely go check that one out if you haven't yet. Those animations are, so good, dude. Now we are going to be taking a look about Vegito's. And ironically enough, I feel like I have a lot more to say about this guy, even though that video was definitely a very long one. And I did still have a lot to say about Gogeta. I've always been kind of mixed on this guy, so I'm going to be very curious to see how my opinion is after we have properly taken a look at this guy in the frame by frame. But of course, before we get started, a couple of things to note. We do have today the comparisons between the original animations and of course the Dokkan version of the animation. So if there's anything that we feel like we want to take a look at the original source of or whatnot, we can do that here. Another interesting thing to note about this is, I mean, you know, it's pretty obvious because it's on the screen. They do take a lot for this unit from the Buu Saga because there isn't really, I mean, anything actually from the fight with Zamasu where he's in base. He literally appears, he goes, "This is Vegito Blue," and then he goes into blue. So it's kind of an interesting little conundrum here that we'll talk about in a minute for that. However, the other thing that I do want to mention is that, of course, when it comes to these type of things, I am not a professional animation analysis guy. You know, I'm not an animator or anything like that. I just love Dokkan animations, and I take a look at the assets all the time. I feel like I know what makes a good Dokkan animation. So let's go ahead and hop into it. We will start off, of course, watching this guy's animations one time full, and then we will go through and take a look at them with the frame by frame. Now, I will say, ironically enough, I feel like over the years, even though I am still very mixed on this guy's animations, especially considering the fact that this guy came out next to Gogeta Blue, right? I feel like I have grown a little bit more soft on these animations over time. I don't know. I feel like I've liked them better as the years have gone on, which is kind of funny to say. I do still think they're really good. I think the problem for me is that even though they do look very, very nice, they came out next to what I personally consider the, like, new gold standard of animations going forward from that point, right? Like I talked about in the Gogeta video, that Metal Cooler kind of was the first unit that really felt like it was a big step in the animation department, right? And then of course STR Gogeta Blue kind of also felt that way to me with how incredible his animations were. And I feel like with this guy, his animations are still really good. Ironically enough, dude, this like active skill, I can't wait till we get to this part of the video because it's so cool, dude. Oh my gosh, I might like this active skill arguably more better than Gogeta's, which is kind of funny to say considering I think I like Gogeta's animations a lot better. But let's go ahead and actually take a look at everything here. So, the one thing that I do want to explain about this guy first, and we were talking about, of course, before, as you can see here, and we'll actually like take a look at the animation in depth in a moment, but when it comes to the base form animations, right, obviously these are taken from the Buu Saga, right, because of course, with Vegito here, he does not actually have any attacks that he does in the, you know, in the like Dragon Ball Super anime, because, you know, he appears in base form and then he immediately transforms, right? So obviously if they're going to make a base form version of this guy, they have to use animations from the Buu Saga. And here's what I think is interesting about that, right? We talked a little bit about this in the Gogeta video, how it's interesting that for Gogeta, right, all of his animations are taken from Super Saiyan Gogeta, right? In the animations, I still have it pulled up here. I guess I can just show you. For this right here, right? Obviously, when he is attacking and fighting Broly, right? In the card, he's in base, but in the animation, he's in Super Saiyan. So what's interesting is that obviously, I said in this video, I talked about how, oh, well, for Vegito, right, they probably made Gogeta's animations in base form because when it came to Vegito, obviously in Dragon Ball Super, when he transforms into Gogeta Blue, he's not Super Vegito at any point, right? I almost said Super Saiyan Vegito. That would have been cursed. He's not Super Vegito at any point, right? Because obviously he goes from base to blue. Now, what's ironic about me saying that is that because they did that, I'm assuming that that's the reason why. I, don't really know why else they would have gone about it that way. They don't have any animations for Vegito because he doesn't fight in base form in Dragon Ball Super. So then they have to kind of make this amalgamation of a card and take the animations from the Boost Saga. I don't know. I just always kind of thought that that was something interesting, that it's this weird sort of like parallel and this kind of conundrum that these two share by doing it this way. I mean, again, like I said with Gogeta, I feel the same for Vegito about the fact that I'm really glad that they did decide to do a base form version. I mean, it really wouldn't have made sense if they're going to make a transforming Vegito card. Like, what else would have done? I guess they could have taken animations from Super Vegito too. But I would have much rather had a base form one in terms of the actual game itself, because obviously in terms of Super Vegito cards, right, there are definitely a lot more of them that are relevant than the actual, base form Vegito himself. I mean, really the only base form Vegitos that I can think of are like, what, Tech Vegito, the really old one, and the World Tournament one, right, the AGL one, and maybe the Int one that nobody uses, right? So obviously having him base form makes a lot more sense. I mean, granted, all the Super Vegitos that we have in the game are kind of been shafted. We're not going to talk about Fizz Vegito right now. But nonetheless, you understand my point. I just wanted to discuss that because I felt that it was worth discussing. And frankly, I don't really know where else I would have, talked about that in another video. So anyway, I know we literally haven't even looked at the animations and we're already 7 minutes in, but it was just something that I wanted to discuss because I thought it was interesting. And of course, it's relevant to the animations because, obviously for all of the base form ones, they take them from the Boost Saga because they don't have anything for the, like base form of Vegito from Super. And I mean, they do also use Super Vegito stuff, as you can see here, and we'll take a look at more in a second, because they're just taken from whatever they can take from. Anyway, let's go ahead and actually take a look at these. So for starters, this is really cool. Funny enough, I kind of feel like with this, it's almost like an intro animation before an intro animation existed. I know they probably weren't thinking about intro animations at this point, but this kind of reminds me of like an intro animation with him, like, come on and fight me. I just think it's kind of funny that that's how they decided to do it. Also very interesting, I just noticed, obviously his hand movement is just fine, but when he finally lifts up his hand, he pauses it on a... Oh no, okay, I see. I thought there was fading between assets. I think it's just a shadow on his fingers? Maybe? Yeah, I think it's just a shadow on his fingers. I don't think that's supposed to be like him waving. It kind of looks like the assets are faded in between each other. And it's like the closed fist asset and a little bit more of an open fist asset. But I do think that it's just supposed to be his hands open because, yeah, there's like 3 sections on your fingers and that would make more sense for that. Anyway, just something interesting that I noticed there. Obviously, we have the card art pop up next. And then, of course, we have the beatdown from Vegito here. Now, personally, this is a decent use of the sprite, actually. It's kind of a little bit wonky because, of course, the sprites in Dokkan are just wonky. That's just kind of like Dokkan's fault, I guess you would say. It's not really at fault of the animation. But it is interesting that they have the character fly forward to kind of, exemplify them coming towards Vegito so that obviously he can just kind of jump over them. I do wish there wasn't that fade there for the asset, but I do think this little shot of Vegito kind of jumping over them in the sky looks pretty good. There could definitely be some more like proper transition into this to this, but nonetheless, I think it looks all right, and I really like the little bit of movement that they have here, right? With how small this is, it's impressive that they included this much movement. And this is the type of thing where, again, right, I said this in Gogeta's video, and I'll say it again with the boy Vegito here. This is the type of thing that really makes me feel like they skimp out on some Dokkan animations when stuff is so far away and they don't include this small little movement. Because clearly, if they can do it when it's this small, right? Like, this is even smaller than the Gogeta one, funny enough. My boy Vegito here is really exemplifying this point well. If they can do it at this small, right? obviously not including the asset fade. We're talking about this bit of minimal movement here. Why can't they do it in other animations too? You know, that's what I'm saying. Anyway, of course, we have him get into pose here. Again, there is a little bit of a fade for the pose where he is going to fly forward, but I do quite like this here. Obviously, it is sort of transitioning from him flying forward to then, you know, stretching his leg out. I do think that this animation would honestly look a little bit bigger, or a little bit better if he had more room to breathe. Funny enough, I don't think I've ever said this before for an animation, but I feel like if Dokkan wasn't a vertical game, this particular instance might look a little bit better, because Vegito does not really have a lot of space to kind of ready up into this pose, right? Like, he goes from getting ready to be stretched out to stretched out basically in the same spot in the air, to then almost just going to the middle of the frame and then basically already having his legs stretched out, right? I feel like if this game was in landscape, then it might be a little bit more of a, like, more sensical transition. I don't know. So I think that that's honestly kind of the problem with that, is just its restricted face. That's, or space, rather. It's not really the Vegito animation's fault. But I do like that transition from obviously him kicking forward to then having the kick be there. I will say it would have been really cool to see, like, maybe the camera kind of pan down into this angle rather than having just a jump cut. But I mean, it's all right. I will say with this, it is a little bit unfortunate that this is just a static PNG. That is one thing that is really frustrating about a lot of these animations for me, is that Vegito's hair and the rest of him doesn't really move for these animations, which you would think, especially by this point, they have that down, right? Especially with how big this asset is in your face. Not having the hair move is almost like inexcusable, right? This looks like a, you know, older shot from a animation from like a couple years ago, right? It almost reminds me, like, this particular shot, you know, in specific, almost like reminds me of STR Vegito Blue with how the way that it looks, right? If it had just even some of those small details included that really brings these animations to life, I feel like it would look a lot better in this case, right? Then, of course, we have the foot make contact with Zamasu, which I actually really like that kick. I feel like it has a ton of impact. You know, maybe it's just because it comes onto the screen so quickly, and Zamasu's just kind of like, oh? Man is lost out to lunch, bro. Did not come back. And immediately gets kicked in the face, right? And obviously with how they have the leg shake, and of course the enemy move forward and Vegito actually pushes leg forward a little bit, I do really, really like that kick. I think it's very satisfying. I like the little bit of movement here too. Obviously this being a little bit of a follow-up. I do want to see, oops, wrong Gogeta there. I do want to see on the actual, like, kick. Where are we here? Going from this to this, I want to see, how does this scene transition? Okay, so it is basically a jump cut in the actual animation, so that makes sense. But again, this is one thing like I'm talking about here, right? Even in the anime, right, the hair is flowing a little bit in this shot. So it's just kind of a shame that, you know, for the actual Dokkan version of this, right, it is literally just a PNG moving forward. I feel like they definitely could have animated that. And maybe if this guy was made in, you know, today's animations, they would have done that. Because even, you know, some Dokkan original animations, well, this isn't really Dokkan original. But, you know, even some Dokkan original animations and some Dokkan animations that are, like, not as crazy as the big boy ones, I guess I should say. Like, you know, the anniversary units and the worldwide units and your, like, major LRs and stuff like that. Even they have a lot of the minimal hair movement present in what would be a shot like this. So maybe if this guy was made, you know, today, that would be the case. But that's the thing, right? Like, having this guy come out next to Gogeta and having this be a problem with this is just so confusing to me why I'm even talking about it. And I don't mean, like, why am I putting it in the video, or I don't know why I'm mentioning it. I mean that in the way of, like, why is it even a problem? Like, why is the hair not moving, you know? And I know it's such a small detail, and it's definitely nitpicking, and I apologize for, you know, being so, like, adamant about the point, but it really is these small details that seemingly go so unnoticeable that make these Dokkan animations feel so alive. And I think it's just one of the little things that makes me dislike these animations sometimes, especially compared to the boy Gogeta. But anyhow, obviously we have Vegito teleport away and teleport in behind, which I do think looks really, really nice. I will say this cut is kind of interesting, going from this to this. But I mean, to be fair, right, his face is literally going to be in Zamasu's face there in a second, so I suppose it makes sense. I also don't think I've literally ever seen this shot before. Maybe it's just because it happened so quick, you know, it's literally on screen for, as you can see, 1-2 frames, right? 3, I guess. And then we go into this one. Obviously, this is a very iconic shot of Vegito, so, you know, of course, this is pretty memorable. But, like, man, I legitimately don't think I've ever seen this before. That's really interesting. Is that shot there in the actual anime? Let's see. I know that the wind-up shot is there, of course. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, interesting. It's also interesting, too, how with this particular shot, right, obviously, this is where he hits him. And this is sort of something Dokkan does sometimes to splice different sections of the anime together when the shot doesn't necessarily like lead into one another and they want to use something else from it. As you can see, right, Vegito ain't teleporting away here. But, right, obviously for this shot, he's teleporting in. And then, you know, they cut to this scene where he is going to punch Boo, which, by the way, very faithful to the original. I do kind of wish that they had him lift his head up a little bit more, like they do in the anime, because I feel like it would look a little bit better than it does in the Dokkan version, where he just kind of like goes into this pose. But I do still like this expression. Nonetheless, though, I do kind of feel like with the anime version, it almost feels a little bit more like fluid in the movement, whereas ironically enough, even though there's more movement in the Dokkan version for this, it kind of feels like it's almost like these different pieces are on sticks, right? It's kind of like a puppet show, sort of, right? Where it's almost like these little like pieces of paper on sticks and you're putting them together to kind of like move it and make it look. So it almost looks a little bit stiff, I guess, in the way that Gogeta moves back, right? Rather than it looking a little bit more fluid. But nonetheless, the punch itself looks really, really good. And I definitely like the execution of the actual punch itself, right? That looks very nice. The camera angle is great. And Vegito giving the beat down to Zamasu here looks fantastic. This entire sequence looks really, really good. And it's nice, too, that when they finish it off here, right, it's not just like, you know, 1 pose, 2 pose. They actually have Vegito ready up for the kick and kick him away. And again, this is the type of thing I'm saying, bro. Dokkan can do better. Look at this nice little, it's very hard to notice, but it's there. You can see Vegito's arms, right, are moving just a tiny bit, just a little bit, right? And that's the thing that I'm saying, right? This little bit of movement makes this shot look so much nicer, so much more lifelike, right? Gives it a lot more of a, you know, interesting just animation to look at for the viewer to look at, rather than if this was just a Vegito PNG with his legs outstretched, right? By the way, I love this pose snap here too, because this is definitely a great way to exemplify like the quick kick and how impactful this is, right? That's a great place to obviously change between the poses. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about, right? That small little bit of movement right there, that's exactly the type of thing that I feel like they should include in more Dokkan animations in places that really need it to just feel like it could just look, you know, that much more better than it already does, and could remedy, I feel like, even some issues with some other Dokkan super attacks. But anyhow, we have the enemy fly away. I like these little electricity effects, right? And then, of course, we have Vegito teleport in and knee the enemy towards the ground. I want to see, how does that look in the actual anime? I'm going to close Gogeta for now because I keep clicking over to it. Let's go to that shot right there. So that would be right here. Yeah, so when the enemy is flying away, I like those electricity effects they added in. That's cool. Okay, yeah, so he knees him away in the anime, I guess? No, that is actually the same shot. Oh, no, okay, they do. Gia does have a cut here from the enemy flying away to them Vegito teleporting in. But obviously that's pretty believable. And funny enough, actually, I think that this, let me double check. I'm pretty sure that this shot is from here. One more frame away. Yeah. When Vegito is hitting him in this shot and then they use it for this one, interesting. They have all of that stuff in between. And then later on in the animation, they come back to this where Gogeta spins, or Gogeta, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I got the big man on the mind. Vegito comes around and spin kicks him, right? Or I guess it would be more like spin knees him, I guess would be the proper terminology there. Yeah, that's really interesting that they go from this, and then they add in everything in between with the punch to the teleport around to the barrage of attacks, right? To the kick, to finally flying away, and then they come back to this scene. Very interesting they didn't just like follow through the whole scene. I guess it's because they wanted it to end with the enemy getting kicked away and flying into the ground, right? Which, I mean, I suppose that makes sense. Also interesting too that Boo actually you know, stops mid-air, whereas for the you know, Dokkan version of the animation, the enemy just hits the ground. Yeah, very interesting. See, it's stuff like that why I love doing these animation analysis videos, because, you know, that's the type of thing that, like, you would never know, you know, is like the case, right? That they literally sort of like inputted that in the middle of the scene from the Boo Saga version of that. Very interesting. Okay, so we now go to the shot of Vegito here. As you can see, the boy standing proud. I always liked this shot. This is like one of those shots in Dokkan where they like to input these very big close-up shots to make these feel a lot more high quality, and I think it does a very good job of that. I always love these close-ups. So nice looking. Anyway, love the little smile he gives. So good, dude. The teleport away looks pretty good. And then, of course, we have him fly in to kick Zamasu. I will say, this is one time where I really don't mind them not showing the actual teleport, because I think this is just like a great implication of movement, because it's like, oh, where did he go? And then, bam, immediately right in the shot. Again, though, this is one scene where I will say, dog, where's the hair movement? Why is it not there? It's just a static PNG of Gogeta kicking. I don't know. That is a little bit unfortunate. And again, here, there is no little bit of movement, just like we saw on the 12 key, right? That would be something that would really bring this animation home and would make it feel a lot more lifelike, right? Rather than just having this static PNG be there. I actually want to see, for the 18 key of this shot, let's see. I want to see how that's made. So it's obviously just taken from this close-up shot of Vegito. And interesting. Okay, so it's basically like a completely different shot that they just string together for that. Okay, well, that's good then. Dokkan did a good job of stringing those two together. And obviously, when they're stringing together these different scenes from the anime, you obviously want it to feel believable, right? Like this attack is happening in a fluid motion, right? Like it's not like it's cut up pieces from something else, that it's, you know, one fluid attack that's happening. So they do a good job of that for sure. All right, so we have Vegito teleport away and then hit Zamasu in the face. Ironically enough, this section has a little bit of hair movement. It's not much, and it's not like the individual strands moving like we see in some other animations, but it does shake a little bit there. You can see it kind of moving a little bit there, right? It's not crazy, but at least it's something, and it almost kind of feels more like a 2D live animation, if any of you are familiar with how those look. A lot of gacha games use that nowadays, but it kind of looks like that for the hair, rather than the hair moving how it does in some other Dokkan animations. But I will say this punch does not really feel that impactful. It could also just be because the enemy sprite doesn't really have like a super great sprite to kind of match up. Obviously, it is just them kind of getting hit away, but it definitely feels a little bit light, right? It doesn't have a lot of impact. And I think it doesn't help that they basically just slide Vegito's PNG, right? There's no recoil. There's no real reaction from Vegito. He's basically just, you know, sliding across the screen. And then we have him teleport away for another kick, which I will say, at least that kick is a little bit better. For sure, I like the snappy movement going from this to this. This look of Vegito, by the way, is super raw in general. But I like this kick a lot. It is kind of unfortunate, though, that, again, no real little bit of hair movement there. And with the static PNG, again, it makes it kind of feel like this animation is a little bit older than it actually is for this particular scene. We then have Vegito teleport in and hit the enemy down, which I will say I really like this shot. And they do a good job of getting these impact frames where they should be, right? We have Vegito come down. Such a good angle, by the way. Again, this, like, I don't know why they wouldn't animate the hair here, right? Because you would think that for this, when he's flying down, you would have those little pieces that are visible kind of fluttering around. But we do have Vegito bring his hands down, right, to then knock into the enemy. And a very nice transition with the impact frames they kind of are in the same spot, right? A little bit close to where his hands are. So your eyes are kind of already in this spot, which is great because then obviously it follows through to where you should be looking for this particular shot, right? And then we do have VEGITO follow through and knock Zamasu down. Ooh, that was really rough on the teleport in. Holy cow, that looks like a flash animation with how they did that, right? They had it like, you know, stretch down and then stretch out and then just had him basically fade in. That literally reminds me of some old Dragon Ball Flash animations. They have done way better teleports than that. Even the teleports in the beginning of this animation were a lot better than that. Interesting. Yeah, so we basically just have him floating there again, just another static PNG. They do twist the PNG a little bit to obviously get him into a straight on position, and they do a very rapid pose change to then him kicking away the enemy, which at least for this they do have a little bit of movement and some rotoscoping, actually kind of making it look a little bit 3D, which is nice to see, and the enemy flying away there. Now, I do want to look at that section really quickly in full motion, because I do think that for that animation, right, it has to be a bunch of different pieces that are stringed together, right? It wouldn't really make sense, I feel like, if it wasn't. So, okay, so it's VEGITO coming up and kicking, right? We have VEGITO teleport away. Okay, yes, and then they try and use this shot. Interesting that Dokkan takes this shot so close up from a far away shot. And then he teleports away into this one, which is a pretty iconic kick. Kind of a shame that they don't do the front angle like the anime does, even though, honestly, this is such a raw, like, pose and expression for VEGITO. I really like this. It is definitely pretty unique, but it's interesting that they don't take it directly from it. I mean, granted, it would have been kind of hard to do because, obviously, the focus then becomes more on Boo. I think, funny enough, excuse me, I believe STR VEGITO, you can correct me on this in the comments, but I believe STR VEGITO has this as his counter, I think, right? Isn't this his counter animation, you know, when he hits the enemy? Obviously, it would be a little bit weird because, of course, Boo is such a focus on getting hit with his head flying backwards, right? And, of course, with how the sprite is, you know, it wouldn't really make sense, but it's just kind of interesting. Okay, so VEGITO does actually teleport in here for this particular shot, and his expression does change. That was another thing that I kind of found weird about this, is his expression doesn't really change throughout the whole thing of this. But as you can see, right, his mouth is closed as he's coming in, and then it gets a little bit more open and angry as he's beating down the enemy, right? And this is basically frame for frame, so that is pretty cool. Definitely very, very nice looking, and the follow through looks good. So I'm curious then, with it actually going down. Interesting. Okay, so I guess I can't be too hard on that in terms of the teleport in, because it kind of does look like that in the anime, but I think the anime does it much better, right? They have it, you know, teleport in, and they have these multiple colors kind of like go around the area that he's teleporting in, and then they have him kind of appear on the screen with a couple of more lines. I think my problem with the Dokkan version is that they just, like, you know, split and stretch the one particular asset of him rather than, you know, having all these different colors appear on the screen. Like, it kind of looks like he's actually teleporting into the scene. Oh, interesting too. They take a very different angle. So, like, they kind of splice this angle, right, with how he's kicking here with this. They don't have this grand turnaround that they do. It's kind of hard to see because Boo is sort of in the way of the shot, right? But they have VEGITO, like, completely turn around here, right? Whereas from the Dokkan version, they basically skip to him already about to kick him, rather than having all of these in-between frames that the anime does, and then basically just cutting to here after the sprite kind of takes up the screen. Interesting. Okay. Very, very interesting the way that they splice that together. I always like to take a look at that type of stuff, because not only do I feel like it's interesting, but obviously when it comes to, you know, those little details, I don't know, I always just think it's cool to see how Dokkan takes the pieces from the anime and puts it together. All right, so now we have the iconic shot of VEGITO charging up the Ki Blast, which I always thought looked pretty good. This shot here, I will say, it does look really great, because not only does the Ki Blast grow in a way that I like, That is such a cool impact frame, dude. Obviously, the key looks great with it coming out of Vegito's hand there. I love the way that it looks. Covering his face honestly looks pretty sick, I'm not going to lie. And then we have the blast fly towards the enemy. It is kind of a shame that it is just like a circle, but I do like the effects around it, right? I think that does look really cool. It almost kind of looks like the Mafuba. But then, of course, the explosion that hits against the enemy does look very, very good. I do want to see, I know exactly where the actual key blast is from, right? And it's interesting that they take a little bit of a different angle for it. I mean, I guess they just sort of, you know, use this one, right, where Vegito has his palm forward. Because obviously when he's actually charging the key, it's from this other angle here. So it's interesting that they just stick with the first one. But, okay, so yeah, that makes sense why that looks like that then, because it's completely different in the anime's version. And obviously for this, it's supposed to be more like just a ball of ki rather than like a beam almost, you know, that's present in the anime version of this attack. Okay, so from here on out, there really isn't too many more Buu Saga shenanigans. I know that there are a couple of really interesting things in here that we'll take a look at once we get to it. However, right, this basically from this point forward is all Dragon Ball Super that we're taking from, right? There isn't as much Buu Saga stuff that they're going off for. I always really liked this animation. I think it looks really, really nice. I will say, I do kind of wish there was a little bit more in between this. This little fade always kind of bothered me. I was talking about this. I know I'm going to bring up Vegito again. I'm sorry, but in Vegito's animations, I talked about how the transformations for both of these units I feel like is probably my least favorite. And honestly, I have to agree. I think there's just not enough animation in this overall. Like, him putting his arms together is fine. I like this zoom in. I guess realistically, maybe it's more so like the intro to this, right? Like, this shot looks really good, obviously, with him shooting up from the ground. There's no denying that, right? Like, they nailed this. But when he lands, right, I feel like the landing is a little bit I wish there was like one more frame of him getting closer to the ground. I feel like it is nice that he does recoil a little bit to obviously kind of land. This shot just looks very funny, but it is accurate to how the anime is. So, you know, that's fine. And then they do have this shot of him with his face up, but I feel like there's not enough of like a transition because obviously he's looking down like this. And then they have him, you know, with his face up towards the camera, right? And then obviously after that, they have him, you know, put it down to then like squat into the power-up pose like this. I almost kind of would have rather had it been this shot first, where his head is a little bit more down like that, because that would have kind of implied that you're looking at it from this angle with his head kind of crunched into his body a little bit, right? And then, you know, it would have been nice if they would have went up to him lifting up his head. I feel like that almost would have made a little bit more sense. Did they accidentally reverse the animation? No, I know. I know that's not actually what happened, but that would be kind of funny. Nonetheless, though, yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like that should be how it would be, I guess. Let's see how it looks in the actual anime for that particular scene, because I'm curious. So, obviously, for the, like I said, for this part, it looks literally spot on. So nice. I don't know. Yeah, he definitely looks a little bit more fluid in landing in the anime version for sure. There's like a little bit of a jump in the Dokkan version, right? But this looks good, obviously, with him then appearing on the scene. Yeah, I understand it's because they're trying to take it from this when he puts his head down. But I don't know. I feel like the transition just looks a little bit weird in Dokkan. And obviously this fade is extremely yucky. It's so obvious. And it really kind of takes me out of the animation, I feel like all the rest of these animations, I'm like, oh, I'm just watching Vegito attack. And then I see this and I'm like, I'm watching a Dokkan animation, you know? It like kind of breaks the immersion a little bit, I feel like. This shot, though, again, literally perfect with the zoom in and then obviously him throwing his head back, him rocking his head back and forth a little bit. The actual power-up, right, looks so good. I love the ki, the aura around him. I love the little strikes of air that are everywhere, right? Even the angle of his head. I will say it is kind of interesting that for the blue transformation, they just go from this to this, and it's there literally even before the ki. I want to see, does it look like that in the anime when he actually goes to blue? Yeah, I was gonna say, I swear in the anime, he only has the blue there once the actual lights appear, which makes a lot more sense than the blue appearing before the lights. I don't know, maybe it's because they're trying to do like a little bit of a trick of the eye, but nonetheless, right, it still looks good. And I gotta say, listen, I know it's not really like incredibly relevant to the animation. This shot looks great, by the way, the zoom out and then the key flowing around everywhere and the intensity coming off of VEGITO. Looks really, really nice. This is not related to the animation, but I just need to say it because I need to get it out. Bro, it is such a shame that this animation is not voiced. If they ever do another VEGITO Blue, dude, I need them to have the transformation be voiced. Because the fact that he doesn't say, and this is VEGITO Blue! Like, the dub and the sub for this scene are so good. Listen, like, I'm not going to bring this discussion in this video because it's not really relevant. Like the dub or sub argument, I'm definitely more of a sub guy myself, right? When it comes to watching anime and especially Dragon Ball. But the sub and the dub got this scene so good, bro. They both cooked. You know, Orega, VEGITO, both of those voice lines are so good. And so it's such a shame that this particular like animation isn't voiced, that it's silent. And it's so funny to me that they even animated him saying it, right? Like you can literally see the lip flaps moving for his mouth, that he is literally saying this is VEGITO Blue or Orega VEGITO Blue, right? He's literally saying it, and there's no audio. It's such a crime, dude. Anyway, sorry. Just had to put that in the video because I've always wanted to get that out somewhere. It's so frustrating, dude. Anyway, though, same thing actually applies to VEGITO as it did for Gogeta here in terms of not really liking the transition. I love this scene. However, this cut is just kind of like meh to me. It's a little bit weird that they go from him like screaming his full head off, right, to then like, hi. He's just kind of standing there stable. I wish maybe they had like, you know, him lower his arms or something like that, you know, get into a more sensible pose that makes sense for transitioning into this rather than just cutting from him screaming to then being, you know, like perfectly there. I don't know. I just wish there was a better transition for it. And unfortunately for VEGITO, he doesn't even have the benefit that Gogeta did of him like moving a little bit, right? Like he kind of moves his arms up a little bit. It is quite literally just a PNG of VEGITO. Granted, the aura does look great. I love the little dots of the Super Saiyan Blue key around him too. And the aura in the background looks good. Like it's not a bad shot, even though this is just a PNG, right? And I do feel like if this animation was made today, it would definitely be a little bit, you know, like more dynamic than just this PNG here. But it's definitely not too bad, right? I just wish that there was more of a transition between this and this. Like the individual scenes are fine. It's the transition between them. Okay, so now we get to the actual 12 key super tech here. Hydrate or Dihydrate. And of course, this is when VEGITO Blue charges forward and is punching Zamasu in the face. I will say, I think they did a great job with this section in particular. There it is! VEGITO Blue! Also, by the way, I don't know why they didn't do a close-up, because obviously this shot is supposed to be like this, right? So it's interesting to me that they didn't zoom in this shot a little bit more. Anyhow, obviously with this particular scene, with VEGITO charging forward, they kind of ad-libbed the beginning of this, which is sort of interesting. I guess just to add a little bit more to the animation. I actually quite like what they added here, right? The movement does feel a little bit stiff. It kind of feels like that effect that I was describing before. It's almost like, you know, like they're taped on sticks and somebody's like rotating the stick with the little piece of paper that it's attached to, you know, for like the individual parts. But I do like it overall, right? Obviously, it's a nice setup to this shot. With, of course, VEGITO standing there in the beginning, right? And it's a very nice little bit of perspective, even though this is just a, you know, VEGITO PNG for this, which they could have done something else, but I mean, I think it's fine for what it is, right? Obviously, passing by the camera and then having him come back into frame is such a nice bit of perspective there. I really, really like that a lot, actually. But then, of course, we have the wind-up. It's almost like what was happening off-screen, funny enough. Dokkan almost gives us a little bit of a look what was happening before Zamasu got smacked in the face. Kind of funny, honestly. But what I always found interesting about this whole sequence, right? So this looks really, really good. But I feel like the animation style is interesting because it is still very much so Dragon Ball Super, but obviously like the line work on Dragon Ball Super, like the outlines of the characters and whatnot and their details, there is a lot more simplistic in Super, whereas I feel like Dokkan goes for a lot more of a detailed look, and the black lines seemingly are a little bit more thick on the Dokkan version, which I think is just kind of interesting. But they do a great job with this particular shot of really, you know, mimicking exactly how they got it in the anime. I do kind of wish that he had a little bit more of an expression change, even though it doesn't really change in the anime. I think the thing is that because of how animation works, right, they kind of make the features change a little bit more as it zooms in. But this definitely feels like a small bit of a different expression, or at least a different angle, right? Whereas obviously with the Dokkan animation, they just kind of zoom into it. However, whew, once we get to this, I love the coloring on VEGITO here. It's so good, dude. I feel like even though obviously the line work, again, I feel like is a little bit thicker on the Dokkan version of this, like look at the difference between the lines on that. Like, this animation, every time I see it, it reminds me of Buchigiri Match. I feel like it looks exactly like the Buchigiri Match animation style, for those of you who are familiar with it. But it's just so interesting to me that for this entire sequence, right, they have a lot different of an art style, frankly, than, you know, the Dragon Ball Super version of it. And I gotta be honest with you, dog, I like the Dokkan version better. For this particular scene, right, I think that the Dokkan version knocks it out of the park in terms of the style. Maybe it's just because I prefer this art style, but I think it just looks better, honestly. Like, if I really had to be that guy. And I mean, obviously there is a lot of quick pose changes here and whatnot, but obviously it works really well. Not only is it very faithful to the source material in the way that VEGITO is punching the enemy, but obviously, you know, it's that quick, snappy movement that represents, you know, it almost kind of like a JoJo Ora barrage, I guess is like the best way to describe it, like the rapid fire punches going off, you know. I think it looks really, really good, and it works well. Again, I just find it so interesting that this is the style that they chose to go with, you know, when it comes to these animations, when, you know, they're taken from this as the source material. But it looks good, and it's a lot more detailed, right? Like the Dragon Ball Super version, I feel like is just a lot more simplistic. Definitely, the, you know, like animation in Dokkan is just a lot more detailed, I think. Okay, so now we transition into this, which is pretty cool. This is another one that we were talking about in the Gogeta video, where they did something similar to this, where it's almost like the card art covers up part of the scene, right? Because you can see here, obviously, they go from VEGITO punching to then the card art appearing on the screen. And then at the end of the card art being there, right, it transitions directly to where the anime is in that particular shot, right? I think that's definitely really, really cool. And obviously, that's a good place to pick because, of course, right, Zamasu is basically the main focus for this part. So, you know, then they don't have to show the stinky sprite on the screen, right? So, I'm saying so a lot right now. I apologize for that. This looks really good. Again, I think I like the Dokkan version of this stylistically more than the anime version. I definitely think that there could be a little bit more in between frames when it comes to the Dokkan version for sure. Like you can see with the anime, right, they have this shot of VEGITO, and then they transition to a little bit more of him kind of rising up. And then they go into this upper shot before he kind of flies off camera. With the Dokkan version, right, it's this shot of him charging forward, and then he's already up in the sky, you know, and then he's charging off camera. So definitely a little bit more extra frames there on the Dokkan version. Cool to see this, though. I've actually never taken an in-depth look at this before. This little, like, ball of white ki, or aura, or I guess maybe just, like, compacted air, whatever this is technically, you know, kind of explodes, and it literally looks like just how it does in the anime, which is cool that they get that style perfectly. It is kind of a shame that they don't shade VEGITO a little bit closer to the anime, because funny enough, I think his legs look a little bit cooler in the anime shot, but you do obviously have him make contact with the enemy. Again, it is a little bit of a shame that, you know, he does have his knee up there, and the Dokkan version doesn't really do that. It basically just goes immediately to this next pose. It is basically just like a static PNG for him, you know, getting hit like that. The other thing that is kind of a shame is that obviously because of the stinky sprites, like Zamasu reacts in the anime, obviously to the knee, right? Like his face goes up. It's kind of a shame that because the Dokkan sprites are just the way that they are, you know, like they just got to be that way. It's just kind of how it is, right? However, funny enough, despite going from a literal static PNG, we have some fantastic movement on the Dokkan version of this. If we go back to here, I want to just take a look at this on like the Dokkan version of it, right? We go from the knee to look at that small little bit of movement with him winding up the punch, bro. Like, so unnecessary, I feel like, or maybe I guess I should be saying instead necessary, because frankly, when they do that, again, it makes these animations feel a lot more lively and a lot more, you know, like just interesting to look at, rather than if this was just a PNG of Vegito standing there with the fist behind him, right? But then, of course, we have the punch, and even there's a little bit of movement, right? They definitely could have just kept this PNG, but no, they actually transition a little bit, which is really nice to see. So this particular animation that we're about to take a look at was always really interesting to me. First of all, let's look at this shot here. It's interesting because they're trying to have Vegito kind of spin around here or imply that movement. There is not enough frames in this section, right? It goes from basically them tilting the PNG to him looking away to now already being whipped around the other way. There should definitely be some more in there to give you more of, you know, the look at the spin, right? So they move, excuse me, the PNG forward and then immediately transition into this one. Definitely should be some more frames in between that. Before they have Vegito change poses like this into the kick, which I think for this it's fine. It's a little bit weird because this is supposed to be his knee or like his shin, but the perspective is just a little bit weird. Like that should definitely be where his foot is rather than where his shin is. So this whole section is a little bit jank, but granted, it definitely is there for such a minimal amount of time that, like, you know, it's harder to notice. But we have the enemy smack into the ground here, and this, I believe, is where a very interesting little tidbit comes in. I think it's from here? Yeah, so with this particular section, right, let's skip ahead to here. With the actual attack, right, first of all, again, this same sort of art style appearing here that's a little bit different than Super, but I really, really like it, right? Like this sort of hyper detailed, all these like colors, whatnot, looks very cool. This animation, I like the perspective of Vegito's hand so close to the camera. However, I wish that there was a little bit more frames in between him readying up the Ki Blast, right? He literally like goes from bam, 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 right? It's so close to, you know, I don't know. I feel like there should just be more frames in between it to really kind of bring it home. This looks funny, but I think this is just because it's, you know, the animation looking that way to, you know, be in motion. And then obviously it looks better in motion. You know, obviously when you frame by frame pause it like that, the perspective's going to look a little bit weird. But yeah, I just wish there was more frames in this section, even though I do like the look of this. And here is where things get interesting, right? I have no idea where this footage is from, so I apologize about that. But not only does this, you know, look a lot better than the Xenoverse version, ayo, this particular shot is actually an attack from Xenoverse, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, the Dokkan version of this looks really good. The rotoscoping here is actually super nice. It must be because they had this video to go off of, right, with sort of like a 3D model to kind of model Vegito's movement after, because Vegito himself looks really good in the actual turnaround. Like it's almost a frame by frame in terms of how the model moves in Xenoverse to, you know, how Vegito moves. But it's interesting that they take this move from Xenoverse, right, and then they implement it into the Dokkan version of the attack, even to the point of having like the beam, right, that kind of strikes across the screen. I think that's very interesting. That's the, you know, direction that they take that attack in. And then obviously they have the little key beams cut through the rocks before the rocks explode. I think the rocks could definitely look a little bit better too. They're just kind of like, woo. They don't really have like a ton of crazy movement to them. Alrighty, so we now move on to the 18 key. And the 18 key is an animation that I have really been looking forward to taking a look at also. Let me take a quick drink of water. Hydrate or dihydrate. But we have, of course, the very iconic shot of this, by the way, first of all, Fantastic establishing shot here with the little glint on the Potara earring. And Vegito moving forward. Obviously, this is supposed to look like he's kind of coming around the building here. This is cool, too, because even though they don't have him move around the building, like, I definitely feel like they could animate that, though. They kind of imply it by the aura sort of coming out from around the back of the building, right? And then it moves in front of it with his hand outstretched, right? That is pretty cool if I do say so myself. Interestingly enough, I always felt like that the movement on that, though, was a little bit choppy. Let's actually look at it in the full speed. I always kind of felt like the way that he moved, not in this particular section, but like right when he comes into the frame, right before he gets big, right there, I always felt like it kind of looked a little choppy. Like that almost reminds me of like a Flash animation, that very beginning part. Because once he's obviously on screen, granted, maybe the aura should be a little bit slower because it's really fast in the way of, you know, like it kind of like flickering around Vegito. But nonetheless, right, I definitely think that again, the way that it is shaded, yeah, see, look, this is literally like he's coming around the building. I don't know why they didn't just animate it like that. And it's kind of interesting, too, because you can't really see Vegito in here, but obviously in the Dokkan version, he's very clear. They could have just, like, layered the aura over him and then, you know, made it disappear or fade away to kind of get that effect. But nonetheless, like, look at how different these shots look from each other, right? Look at how detailed the lines are on Vegito's hand, right? Compared to the version in Super. It almost kind of looks like his hand is like disappearing into the aura, but that's obviously because, you know, like the middle of the Super Saiyan Blue aura is kind of white. But it's interesting too because they use a lot more of these darker blues for the Dokkan version, whereas where the Dragon Ball Super version, it's almost like cyan, right? It's kind of like, you know, this very bright blue that they use. It's kind of just an interesting differentiation between the two. I don't think it's bad by any means necessary. It's just any means necessary, funny supreme. But it's just, you know, something interesting to point out, I feel like. Anyhow, we have the fist, obviously 5 forward, and they do a good job of this too. With them actually slapping together like this, I think this is very well done too. Again, the literal, like, exact shapes of the aura are pretty well exemplified here from Dokkan. Even this weird, like, perspective that, obviously, this is supposed to be, like, somebody watching on, you know, in between two buildings, right? Like, looking through the crack of these two buildings, right? That's kind of what it's supposed to be, and they even do that in the Dokkan shot here, which is cool. I will say, I feel like it works a little bit better in the anime because the edges are blurred, whereas the Dokkan one, you can kind of see that they're, like, these little bit of harder shapes. But nonetheless, though, I understand what they're going for. And even though this shot is so far away, obviously in both of these versions you have Vegito punching Zamasu, and I feel like this is one time where it's like, dog, this is completely fine for there to not really be a lot of minimal movement, because he's just kind of wailing away on him, right, in this very far away shot. But even so, it still looks very fluid, right? Like he's going bop, 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 you know, almost like a boxer, you know, like hitting a boxing glove that's like, or boxing glove, you know, like those little things that hang from the ceiling. I don't know what they're called. I'm not an expert on the topic, but, you know, something that a boxer would hit like over and over and over, right? And it's like the, you know, type of thing. That's kind of what this shot reminds me of, and I think it's done very well. It's also interesting, again, Vegito's hair is so bright in the anime, right? Like, you can clearly see it from a mile away, and it's kind of harder to tell in the Dokkan version. But anyway, then we get into this shot, right? And we have this, which... I hate to be that guy, but dog, I think I like the Dokkan version of it better. I don't know. This episode, like the animation, again, I'm no expert, and I'm not here to comment on the animation on the anime. I mean, even though I guess I technically have been doing that the whole time. But, right, in terms of, like, the quality of the animation, right, I'm not an expert. I can't give you, you know, any insight on that. However, I do just think that, like, the more detailed shading and whatnot on the Dokkan version, I guess I just favor it, would probably be the better thing to say. I do think that his expressions do look less jank, though, if I am allowed to say that. Like, his expression in the anime version here is definitely a little goofy, I gotta be honest with you, right? But then this, even though, you know, this one's a little off screen, I do kind of like how this looks, actually. I feel like this just looks more Vegito-esque. And then we have this shot here too. Again, I feel like his facial features just kind of look more like how Vegito should in the Dokkan version, right? Whereas with the anime, the facial expressions are just a little bit weird. However, again, right? It is also a thing of these shots are happening so quickly, and it's supposed to be, you know, watched in movement rather than, you know, obviously the character just standing still there. Interestingly enough here, though, as you can see, right, the shots kind of mismatch here for just a moment, but then they reconnect. It's kind of interesting that sometimes they do it like frame by frame with the animations, but then they're a little bit off by the frames. Obviously, that is certainly not something that they have to get down, right? That's like, would be crazy. But it's kind of interesting to point out. But I feel like this expression for Vegito looks a little bit less shocked. And maybe it's not supposed to be shocked, actually, because maybe the anime version just kind of makes it look like that. But we obviously have Vegito kick Zamasu in the face. We see again, like it matches up the frames once again, and then we're back here. It's kind of interesting to note. I do like the little bit of the effects there. I feel like, too, if this animation was made today, they might have actually included the spit, because I've definitely seen in some modern animations where they've actually included, like, the spit coming out of the sprite that would be in the, you know, anime of whatever it's taken from. So I do think that's kind of interesting. But yeah, then obviously we have the... Wait a minute, Gogeta! What are you doing here? They took an animation for the Broly movie? I actually did not know that, or didn't remember that, I guess. Very interesting. I mean, yeah, that is like the exact pose. And even the way that the explosion effect is with the smoke off of it. Huh, very, very interesting. Well... Regardless, though, I think Dokkan does a good job of implementing it into Vegito's animations. I think the smoke looks good in Dokkan. I think the effects look good. The explosion effect looks nice, even the little bits that kind of come off of it. And it's kind of hard to tell because the screen is so shaky, but Vegito definitely has some very nice little bits of movement in here, right? You can kind of see his hands. It's hard to see because of the screen shake, but his hands do move just a little bit. Like we can see it right there, right? And his foot actually does move a little bit too, you know, so it's nice that they included that. Again, it's those little things that make it feel so much more lifelike. Yeah, very interesting. So obviously this is, I don't know if I would say that this is necessarily the Broly movie shot, because this could just be any generic like character flying array scene, but obviously that scene before was definitely taken from the Broly movie. That's interesting. Okay, so now we have, of course, the shot of Vegito teleporting up to Zamasu, right? Let's see how this looks in Dokkan with the teleport. Okay, it doesn't look too bad. I definitely think the anime is like coloring and the lines on this looks a little bit cooler, if I do say so myself, right? They're a lot more like lighter, I guess. There's a lot less lines in the Dokkan version, but pretty much when they get here, though, it's virtually the same as the anime, right? We then, of course, have Vegito teleport in right before Zamasu's face. Definitely like that they also included him floating up a little bit. And very, very nicely done. Again, interesting that they also have his mouth closed in a little bit of this. I guess it's because they're not animating the mouth flaps, right? Because obviously this is Vegito talking in the anime, but his mouth is just open the whole time in the Dokkan version. But very, very nicely done on the effects on the hand for the Dokkan version. And too, a little bit of rotoscoping that we're going to see here, right? It kind of makes it look like he's actually, you know, like moving forward with the way that he's, well, moving. Go figure, right? And then, of course, we have this quick snap forward, which, I mean, is basically just how it is in the anime. And very, very nice effects on the hand. Very much so exemplifying that look of, like, the, you know, sort of like aura pulsating off of it. It looks good, right? It absolutely looks really good. Interesting that Dokkan doesn't have the aura already on the hand. It finally appears there when it actually makes contact with the enemy sprite. But we, of course, have Vegito punch the man down. Ooh, that is a very nice attention to detail that Dokkan even included his eye glowing a little bit there, just like they did in the anime. That's really cool. Definitely like that a lot. See here, look, his hair moves. His hair moves right there, right? Like, even the bang moves a little bit. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting that they didn't include that for some of it. Also curious here, too, right? This angle is a lot different, right? Obviously, I like the air effects that they have on the Dokkan one, but it's from the side, and they basically use a, like a sprite almost for Vegito here when he's punching him down. Oh, I see, because this is when they defuse. So, obviously, because, you know, that's not what they want. You know, they want to obviously keep him as Vegito. They just have the attack, you know, follow through down. And then, of course, it hits the ground like that. I don't know why... oh, I see. Interesting. I was going to say, I don't know why Gogeta is here for this, but yeah, I guess that is literally exactly how the ground breaks in the Broly movie scene there. Huh. Interesting. I definitely would have never noticed that. Very, very interesting, for sure. I do like the way that the smoke goes in this, though. It is nice to see, because, like, the way that the lines kind of, you know, fill out, right, in this particular shot, you can see that they dissipate out in these specific directions. And then when they actually zoom out, right, they kind of follow that pattern out. And then not only that, the smoke also kind of falls into where those cracks, or I guess comes out of, you would say, you know, where the actual, like, lines in the ground would be from the explosion. And the explosion sort of follows suit out in the same ways that it exploded out. Definitely very nice, too. I like the little rings as well, of the smoke, the air, I guess you would say. Sometimes it's kind of hard to know what those particular things are supposed to be. But anyhow, so what's interesting then, going forward, right, is that a lot of this animation is actually kind of ad-libbed for the beginning part of this, right? If we go to the active skill now, of course, Vegito, standing proud, right? It is kind of unfortunate that this is just a PNG, right? I do wish that there would have been a little bit of something more on this. Obviously, for the Broly movie, they literally had the Kamehameha to take from at the end of the film. So, of course, for like that entire sequence, they can just take it from that. But for the Kamehameha part with him like actually just beginning to stand there, I suppose, you know, it's like, what do they take that from? So, with this, though, I mean, I do like this, even though it is just him standing there. This PNG is very, very nice. It's super high quality, right? I do like the zoom in from his face to zooming out to his full body. The aura encompassing him does look very, very nice too. It actually does look like it's moving around him, right? Like it looks like these parts are behind him, you know, and these parts are in front of him, right? That looks good, and I do like that it sort of covers him all the way until he finally, you know, begins to glow a little bit more from the aura around him. I do kind of wish that the aura was a little bit bigger. Like, every time I see a Saiyan hair, I feel like it shouldn't be that close to the edge of the aura, but that could also just be me misremembering a little bit. Nonetheless, though, as you can see here, right, obviously the aura looks fantastic on Vegito. I think they nail the Super Saiyan Blue aura very well in Dokkan, especially with the little, like, specks that kind of fly around in it, making it look sort of, like, godly and whatnot. It looks really, really good every single time, for sure. We do have another bit of a zoom in, right, where they kind of give you a little bit of a lens flare with Vegito's face here. And this is where we transition into the Kamehameha. This entire sequence looks so good, man. I really, really like this active skill. It's so nice looking. So, you of course zoom out, right, to Vegito bringing his arms out to the side. And we then have the zoom back in and out and the zoom in again. The zooming is like, I feel like it might be a little bit much for some. But honestly, I really like it because it just makes it more dynamic to look at and it makes it interesting. And as well, it's a good way for them to be able to transition between assets without you really noticing, right? Like, I'm sure you didn't notice that he was kind of looking off to the side and now he's looking directly towards the camera, right? You don't really think about that because you're being distracted by everything else that's going on. And the little lens flares also kind of help with that, right? It makes sense too because obviously I would assume as you would get closer to the inside of a, you know, Super Saiyan Blue aura, it would kind of be a little bit brighter because it's like the white is kind of on the inside and the blue is sort of on the outside. We have this nice shot of him obviously going into his face and then coming back out with his hands now outstretched and his face open. This perspective is so cool. I really, really like this. Obviously, you know, it looks like his hands are closer to the camera, whereas his face is farther. The electricity effects look really, really nice too. And again, another zoom in to his face here. A very, very nice, just kind of like establishing shot and making you really feel like how intense this is, right? The electricity going crazy. The aura looks good. Vegito himself looks so good, so nicely colored as well. And finally, we have this shot where, again, you don't really notice this transition going from here to here. You can't even really see because of the electricity. But again, he's sort of looking from directly at the camera to now being a little bit crooked. and you have the electricity effects go away until you have the Kamehameha effect form in his hand with the very cool electricity. Very well done, as it is basically exactly how the anime does it. And you also transition the face just a tiny bit there, which is kind of interesting because obviously what they are about to do is take you on a ride, right? They really didn't need to change it, I feel like, there, but I suppose it makes more sense, obviously, once he starts bringing his hands sideways. This looks very jank, like this, but obviously you're not supposed to see it because, you know, you're not pausing the animation. But him swinging his arms back looks good. There could maybe be, like, one more thing in between there, one more frame or two, but I honestly feel like it works well for what it is because it's supposed to be intense. It's supposed to be him whipping his arms back, so obviously, you know, it happening that quickly makes sense for the scene. This shot is always so cool to me. I really, really like the way that this looks with him charging it. And I will say, I love that his arms almost like grow bigger because it's almost kind of like the angle that you're looking at with this, right? Your perspective is going a little bit more from like Vegito's face and kind of being like in front of him to almost like being a little bit more focused on the hands, I guess. Not really in front of him, but you know what I mean, right? It's just a really cool perspective change. And then, of course, we zoom into the face, zooming into the eye there. Fantastic transition, by the way, going from, you know, him getting ready to fire it. I do wish that this face was a little bit more graceful, but when they zoom in here like this, it looks so nice with him finally launching it forward. This, by the way, this shot right here looks exactly like Gucci Match to me. I don't know why. Again, it's just that art style. But with him throwing his hands forward, this shot of Vegito is crazy. Look at that expression. I don't even think I've ever seen that expression before, honestly. This looks really, really cool. And then we transition directly into this impact frame here of Vegito I should say shooting the key for it. I love the little bits of electricity there as well. Looks very, very nice. And the aura surrounding him too. We have the key explode out and bam, there you go as well. Obviously this very, very nice, you know, blue kind of just covering him. Obviously this is supposed to be like you're in the middle of the Kamehameha, right? That's kind of what you're, you know, emulating with this shot. And then of course they have the side angle that looks great. Look at Vegito there with the motion lines on him. Obviously this looks just like the anime with the final Kamehameha approaching the enemy. Again, such a good job of angles on this too. Funny how the angle of that also kind of mimics the Gogeta movie, or the Broly movie rather, on the way that it moves, in the way that it like twists. I do want to see, I want to see how that entire sequence looks for the actual like anime. So what's interesting is that before he brings his hands together, right, there isn't anything that this is actually referencing, right, until it finally zooms in, right, and this is actually taken from Fighters, which is really interesting, right? Now, funny enough, I feel like a lot of the time when Fighters animations are used in Dokkan, typically whenever I've seen that and it's been pointed out to me or I notice it myself that an attack is from Fighters, obviously we're not talking about like the Fighters, you know, cards themselves, like the Android 21 or the Android 16 or something like that, right? We're talking about like, you know, cards that just reference it, like AGL Trunks or the Tech Androids, right? I feel like it ends up not really looking that great in my opinion. Most of the time I see it and it's like, yeah. They really cut corners a lot with it, and it just doesn't help that Fighters look so good already. You know, it's hard to kind of emulate that. However, hot dog, they did a good job with the Dokkan one, I'd say. They did a very, very good job using this reference material and this angle to their advantage for sure. I would say that the Dokkan version looks fantastic. It's kind of hard to compare the anime and Fighters, or I'm sorry, the anime and Fighters. It's kind of hard to compare Dokkan and Fighters because obviously, you know, they're two very different games, but for this, right, I think they definitely did a very good job capturing the angles of Fighters and, you know, really using this reference material to their advantage, right? They definitely did a good job of it. I will say it is a little bit of a shame that they didn't include, because Fighters has this scene literally right after this where they show Vegito Blue obviously on the screen for one frame, and then Goku Blue, and then Vegeta Blue right on the screen for like the next couple of frames. So it's kind of a shame that they didn't do that in the Dokkan one, because that would have been super sick, but, you know, I understand that the focus is supposed to be on Vegito. And then, interestingly enough, this entire sequence right here is actually Dokkan Original, it seems, which is really, really cool. And they did a great job with this, I would say. But I wondered why this looked a little bit familiar and why he almost kind of looked like the shape of Gogeta, because this actually takes directly from this front shot here of Gogeta firing off the Kamehameha, which is interesting. Obviously, it's just for that particular sequence, right? It almost even kind of looks like, if I'm being honest, in this blue section here, it almost kind of looks like the silhouette of Gogeta rather than VEGITO. I know that's kind of silly to say because they're basically the same character, but that is kind of how it looks, if I'm being honest with you. Nonetheless, though, this shot, again, very, very well done. I love the way that the electricity, or the yellow, I guess, you know, kind of like wraps around the Kamehameha. Interesting that they skip this particular scene. They don't include this like up above shot, and then they go right into you know, the twist. I guess with the twist as well, this isn't from the Dragon Ball Super episode where it twists around like this before hitting the enemy. That is literally the same thing as the Gogeta Blue one when his final attack is hitting Broly. It's interesting, but I think I prefer that, even though it is almost like the same animation as the Gogeta one, just, you know, a little bit of a different attack on it. It's a lot more interesting than how the anime does it here, where it's literally just a beam flying towards the enemy, right? And then it just kind of turns the screen to blue. I think what they did in Dokkan is definitely a lot more interesting. And I do say this sometimes in Dokkan, and it's good to see that they do it once in a while. Like, this is a great example, you know, where they take what's in the original anime and they make it better, right? The way that they edit it up or cut it up is just better than the anime version. I mean, again, all opinionated, right? So it's just my opinion that that's the case, but I like it when they do that because, of course, then I feel like it makes it look better, makes it look more interesting, and just more of a fun animation to look at, right? Rather than just something that could have been more boring, you know, expanding upon the source material and making it even more interesting. So besides that, obviously we do have this end shot where they actually capture the buildings getting disintegrated very, very well. And of course, this little ball here with the explosion, and it looks just like how the anime does. So very, very cool. And the KO screen is not based off of anything in particular. I will say this is a bit of a weird one, right? Because I always felt like the animation looked kind of weird on the KO screen, because obviously it's this weird like blur effect where it's kind of like moving like this, right? And a little bit of you know, not motion blur. I mean, there is definitely motion blur on it, but like animation smearing and kind of like stretching out Vegito's limbs a little bit more as he like moves, right? Like, let's get to the part with his hand there, right? His hand kind of gets a little bit of weird like angle on it for just a couple of moments. Kind of unfortunate we don't get to see this in unblurred quality here. And it's weird because I almost feel like they're trying to do this thing where, you know, like Vegito obviously is bringing his hand forward and just twisting towards the camera, but I've literally never seen Dokkan animate it like that before, and I've never seen them do it again after this animation. I think this is the one time I've ever seen them do it like this, because it's not even like how they do the ghosting effect, right? Like the fade that they do on some of the animations that I'm not necessarily a fan of. It's so different than that. And it almost kind of feels like they're trying to go for like sort of like a slow-mo type of thing, or like a, I don't know, like a finishing shot. I mean, would make sense because it's the KO screen. You know, just sort of like an epic conclusion type of thing, right? With the way that they have it animated. I don't know. It's just very weird to me. I don't think it's bad. I just think it's different. I will say, though, I am definitely not a fan. They do one regular little ghosting effect for twisting the hand there, right? They start the rotoscoping, and then they cut halfway. Not cut literally, but they cut corners halfway, and then just ghost into it already being, like, turned around a little bit there. But yeah, I don't know. I just always found this KO screen kind of interesting. In that regard, that I feel like it's animated very differently from the rest of it. I do love the little bit of the blue specks, though, by the way. They do fly down from the sky there, and the blue aura sort of dissipating off from where he would have fired the attack. That is a very nice little, you know, just extra bit that definitely did not have to be there, because Vegito, I think, is just fine enough by himself. But, you know, that really makes this feel like such a high-quality unit. And, you know, just I feel like makes it look even better. All right, so that is gonna do it for the boy Vegito Blue. Overall thoughts on this one. So I'm still conflicted, right? because I really like this guy's animations. I think they're really, really cool. You know, I think they're really, really interesting. It is very interesting, the sort of amalgamation that this guy is. Obviously taking stuff from Super, taking stuff from Z, taking stuff from Xenoverse, taking stuff from DBS Broly, right? All to kind of come together in this culmination of this unit. Like I said in the beginning, I think the other thing with this guy is that it's just so hard to put him next to Gogeta, because obviously Gogeta's animations are like insane, you know, especially compared to the majority of this guy's. And that's of course because they had a lot more to go off of for that, of course, right? They have the Gogeta movie to go off of, whereas they're taking from all these different things and cutting different scenes together, you know, splicing them together to make these animations. You know, obviously besides more so the Super Saiyan Blue stuff, obviously a little bit of that applies more to the base form stuff. And also taken from fighters. That was another one that I forgot to mention. But overall, I mean, I think he's really cool. I definitely like this unit a lot. Again, I think the active skill is so good, dude. I love the active skill. It's genuinely like one of my favorites in the game. And it's so cool that it's like, you know, kind of a Dokkan original. They obviously take some reference material for it. But I think just it looks great overall. It really gives you that feeling of intensity that you felt when watching that original anime episode. And nonetheless, I think they even improve upon it in some areas. So yeah, I just really like it overall. I do really like this guy's animations. I definitely think that if he came out today, there would definitely be some things that they could have done to improve upon him a little bit more, whether it be some of that little bit of minimal movement or some of the, you know, asset fades, the ghosting and whatnot. There are definitely some little things that they surely could have done to improve him. But overall, I definitely like him, right? Pretty solid for sure. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. I am very excited for both of these guys to get a EZA. I am very much so looking forward to using them. Obviously, they came out today, so definitely go cop yourself the EZAs if you are playing on JP. And I think I said it before, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this guy's animations. I would definitely love to hear what you have to say. I will say, I do think even though these guys' animations, or I guess this guy rather, because it's just VEGITO, it's not Goku and Vegeta, I think his animations have definitely aged a lot more than Gogeta's. I do still think in terms of some of his stuff, there is some stuff that's a little bit of ahead of his time. And not to mention the active skill, I think is definitely better than even some animations, you know, in today's standards. So, you know, it's cool to see that, again, both of these units, I know I sound like a broken record. Even though I think that Gogeta's is a little bit better, it's nice to see that both of these guys were seemingly a little bit ahead of their time, honestly. Because that active skill, man, just so good. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.